If you thought Stardew Valley was just a farming game, think again, as you are wrong for so many reasons, but in this video I'm going to take you on an archaeological exploration to discover what sort of hidden history lies beneath the surface. Hi, I'm Louise and I'm an archaeology student and also a massive fan of the game Stardew Valley. I've always noticed the archaeology components while playing, but it wasn't until I took a deep dive I was actually surprised to discover quite how rich the archaeology is of Stardew Valley, and that you can begin to piece together quite a rich archaeological record and history. All the information in this video is correct to my knowledge to the 1.5 version of this game. 1.6 is coming really soon, so some things may change, and all the interpretations are completely my own. If you've got any other ideas, maybe I've missed stuff, maybe you think differently, do let me know and we can start a discussion down below. Also down below you can find my blog, and that's got a link to a full write-up of this video and any further reading and resources that I've used, just if you're interested and want a bit of a further look. But let's dig into it. Stardew Valley is a farming life simulator game which was released in 2019 by developer Concerned Ape. You start the game by inheriting your grandfather's old farm plot in Stardew Valley, and you only have a bit of money and a few tools to start your brand new life. The game has overwhelmingly positive reviews, and I absolutely love it myself, and there are over 500,000 positive reviews on Steam at the time of filming this. In Pelican Town there is a Stardew Valley library and museum, which is also the Archaeological Office. The character Gunther is located here, and he is the local curator and librarian. At the start of the game, the museum is completely empty and Gunther asks the player for help filling it up. This is done by donating artifacts, minerals and lost books the player finds through gameplay. The game quickly introduces archaeology by having an archaeology quest. This is usually triggered pretty early, as the player just has to enter the museum to trigger this quest. The mission of this quest is to find an artifact or mineral, then donate it to the museum, which is pretty easily done. Artifacts can be found in numerous ways: using the hoe on an artifact spot, using the hoe on dirt in the mines, killing monsters, digging up treasure chests and breaking open artifact troves. In total there are 95 objects the player can find and donate to the museum, 53 minerals and 42 artifacts, and only a single copy of each can be donated. When the player reaches certain donation thresholds and criteria, Gunther rewards them with various items. The reward for achieving 60 total donations triggers a cutscene where Gunther visits the player to thank them for their work and inform the player the museum has been awarded the coveted Golden Shield Award for our significant contributions to the archaeological field. Once the player has donated an item, there isn't really much that can be done with the duplicates. Some are used in crafting recipes and bundles, but most artifacts can also only be sold for a small amount in sort of the bin which you put your items in to sell them. But this is actually quite refreshing. So the artifacts you wouldn't really want to go and collect them to just sell them for gain, for profit. So there is actually no treasure hunting archaeology aspect, which is quite a common misconception that archaeology is treasure hunting and selling things for profit, when it's really not.
That belongs in a museum!
Games that are quite similar to Stardew Valley, sort of Animal Crossing and The Sims, really do sort of have this for profit sort of side. So this is quite a new approach. It would be nice to see the game implement something else to do with the duplicate artifacts, potentially shipping them to other museums or researchers with maybe a chance of unlocking more information about them. Looking at the collection of artifacts and beginning to explore them individually, most actually resemble real archaeological finds, and when you start to analyse this collection, you can actually start to draw archaeological theories and chronologies about Stardew Valley through time. And here are the artifacts that I have used for my archaeological analysis of Stardew Valley, and these are sort of grouped in ways that will make sense as we go through this video. So let's explore the archaeological eras of Stardew Valley, and in this part I will be using real world terminology as we don't know the correct terms that they would use as archaeologists in Stardew Valley. The Elemental Era. The first identified era of occupation by a group of beings is what I have termed the Elemental Era. This most likely started before human occupation, and the most active location of the valley during this time was the mines, suggesting perhaps that the above land had been maybe more inhospitable, potentially due to an alternate climate. The Shadow People are the first known group to occupy this area and were eventually imposed upon by the dwarves. However, they do not have a material culture, just oral histories that will be detailed later. One of the main artefacts of the dwarvish culture that the player can discover are 4 dwarvish scrolls. Upon completing all set and having all 4 of these dwarvish scrolls, The player gains the ability to understand the language used by the dwarves, and then is able to communicate with the dwarf who lives in the mines. The dwarf is very wary of humans and shadow people, as referenced throughout conversation. When the player reaches 6 hearts of friendship with the dwarf then states, "Long ago, my people knew the secrets of advanced technology. The archaeological evidence proves that. But I wonder where it came from, and where did it all go? I guess some questions will never be answered." There is archaeological evidence that the player can discover which the dwarf is referring to. This includes the helm, rusty cog, and dwarf gadget. Dwarvish artefacts are most likely to be uncovered in the mines area, and this just suggests that their settlement was based here. There has actually been some local research within Stardew Valley into the dwarves, and this is detailed in one of the lost books, Mysteries of the Dwarves by M. Jasper. To summarise this, his interpretation believes that the dwarves are an ancient alien race who crashed into the valley a long time ago deep underground. So like I said, we only know of the coexistence of the dwarves and shadow people through oral histories. The dwarf is very wary of shadow people and initially believes the player is a spy sent by them. The player encounters shadow people mostly as an aggressive monster in the mines. However, there is one friendly shadow person the player can interact with who lives in the sewers, which is Krobus. Krobus is also wary of humans, but equally as dwarves, scared the player will alert the dwarves to his location and they will send an assassin. Later in the game, there is an event where the player enters the sewer to find a dwarf and Krobus fighting. Then the wizard is there to intervene. When the wizard intervenes, he references an event he called the Elemental Wars, stating they are long over, but they definitely occur in Krobus' and the dwarf's lifetime. We're not sure how long ago this is, but it is definitely very culturally relevant still for the dwarfs and shadow people. And it tells the player that the dwarfs drove the shadow people out of their ancestral lands, which we presume is the mines, and then war broke out. So it is unclear when these elemental wars ended, but if you consider that they are both so equally as wary of humans as well, I believe that the war eventually sort of fizzled out to sort of mutually unhappy peace settlement when human occupation of the valley began. And that leads us really nicely onto our next era, human prehistory. In our own world, prehistory is usually divided into 3 stages: Stone Age, Bronze Age and Iron Age, and the Stone Age itself is also further divided into 3 separate sections: the Paleolithic, which is the Old Stone Age, the Mesolithic, which is the Middle Stone Age, and the Neolithic, which is the New Stone Age. In Stardew Valley, I think human occupation seems to follow a similar pathway, but it is definitely less defined due to a lack of archaeological evidence, and these are the artefacts that I deem fit into the prehistory of Stardew Valley category. So the first artefact I want to explore is the prehistoric hand axe, and this is described in-game as perfectly as an archaeologist would an Acheulean hand axe. One of the earliest tools employed by humans, this crude tool was created by striking one rock with another to form a sharp edge. Acheulean hand axes are probably one of the most distinctive archaeological artefacts. The name comes from the site when they were first identified, St. Achille in France, and they are one of the oldest tools used by the human species, with the oldest dating to approximately 1.76 million years ago, and the newest to 200,000 years ago, which is in the Paleolithic period, so the Old Stone Age. Most researchers believe they were cutting tools, however this is still debated, with some suggesting they were throwing weapons or perhaps used in social signalling. They are thought to have been produced by the human species Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis. And this find suggests that the human species came into Stardew Valley very early in human history, perhaps not being Homo sapiens when they first arrived. The bone flute is another example of a find which could date to the Paleolithic. There are several examples of these in real life, however the oldest dates to Germany in 2008 when vulture bone flute fragments were excavated in a Stone Age cave, and these are estimated to be 40,000 years old. Chewing sticks are the origins of toothbrush and date to as early as 3500 BC in Babylon. There are also records from about 1600 BCE in China, which describes how one end of a stick was chewed until it became sort of bristly enough that you could brush your teeth with it, and then one end was sort of pointed so you could sort of use it as sort of a toothpick. And there's also references to chewing sticks in ancient Greek and Roman literature. Throughout history, arrowheads have been used and made across the world, but the earliest evidence comes from about 64,000 years ago in South Africa, where some stone points have been discovered, which could be argued to be the earliest arrowheads. So the earliest weapons that could be described to be an ancient sword come from a site in Turkey, where 9 swords were discovered here in the 1980s, and these are 45 to 60 centimetres in length, so would either be short swords or long daggers, depending who you ask. So these were about 5,000 years old, dating to around 3,300 BC. I can't tell you much from just the ancient seed, but I'd like to point out that this offers a really fun thing that archaeobotany could exist in the archaeology universe of Stardew Valley. So archaeobotany is when you analyse plant remains to sort of figure out what people ate, what sort of pollen was, and if they have ancient seeds you could sort of maybe investigate that and see how they were used in the past. And technically the farmer trying to grow the ancient seed could be argued as a form of experimental archaeology. Zooarchaeology, the study of animals in the past, is also a component of this period. Throughout gameplay, the player can collect 7 different pieces of prehistoric bone. This includes the scapula, tibia, skull, hand, rib, vertebrae and tail. When all parts have been collected, the player can then has 3 different parts which together, when placed together, make a soft skeleton replica. This skeleton I think resembles that of a megalonyx, which is an extinct group of ground giant sloths that were around North America, which is where Stardew Valley does seem to be based on, living from about 5 million years ago to about 13,000 years ago when they came extinct. So these sorts of finds and the frequency of them do suggest that these giant sloths also roamed Stardew Valley in the prehistoric eras. Also, I'd really like to point out that, interestingly, all these potential prehistoric finds are most likely uncovered in the mountain, forest and bus stop areas of the valley, but not in Pelican Town. So these areas in-game are really rich foraging areas, and before the invention of farming in the Neolithic, humans were all hunter-gatherers, and that is of course if Stardew Valley mimics our own prehistory patterns. So potentially early human occupation didn't occur in the town, or maybe the evidence there has been lost because of continuous occupation. My next era I'm terming the Middling Era, and these are finds that probably occurred in the middle, but there's sort of a less defined chronology here. So one of the finds is chipped amphora, and amphora do actually have prehistoric origins, but they are mostly associated with the ancient Greeks and Romans. These are sort of containers used to store and transport a wide range of products, but are very well known for holding wine. This find is also typically uncovered in Pelican Town, and like I said before, the prehistoric finds, we don't find any of them in Pelican Town. So this may suggest that these actually date to a later date, which is pretty interesting. Glass shards are usually found at the beach, and in-game are described as maybe coming from a mosaic or part of jewellery. There aren't many examples of glass used in mosaics, but there are some Roman examples, and glass is obviously used in jewellery as well, so I don't really know too much about this artefact. The rusty spur and chicken statue could come from a wide range of periods, but what I like about these are that they are both found on the farm, and it tells us that people in this area have been raising animals on this piece of farm for centuries, and that they have a particular love for chickens. The ancient doll is hard to define to a particular era, but I do love the in-game description defining it was probably used for ritual purposes, which if you've ever spoke to an archaeologist, you will know archaeologists love the phrase, it's ritual. The mask and golden relic don't have a set parallel date, but interestingly these are only found in Calico Desert, so this would suggest there was a settlement there with maybe a fondness for gold. The golden relic also has hieroglyphics inscribed on it, which is an ancient Egyptian writing system. There's also a period of ancient pirates visiting the beach, with evidence of the anchor being left behind by them at some point. 6th era tourism. The ornamental fan is described as likely belonging to a noblewoman, but I think the really interesting part is that it says historians believe the valley was a vacation spot for the wealthy in this 6th era, as they like to visit the beach. I don't exactly know when this 6th era is, but I'd say with my own perception of this, it feels closer to our modern time, sort of, you know, Victorian sort of vibes. I'm not sure exactly. But hand fans can actually be traced to over 4,000 years ago. For example, in ancient Egypt, there was also 2 even found in the tomb of Tutankhamun, but they are quite widely known for being popularised in China and Japan. Unknown periods. There's one other group of beings that have left material culture in the forest, which is the elves, which is where this piece of elvish jewellery can be found. This has an undeciphered script in it and is of a completely unknown date. Other beings do exist in the games, like I've mentioned the shadow people don't have a material culture, just oral histories, but we do have fairies and goblins in the game as well, and they also have no material culture. So maybe other archaeological artefacts may be added for them, which is kind of interesting that more could definitely be added to the game. I'd like to give you my final era, which is modern, and the rusty spoon is technically an archaeological artefact tying us to the modern day, and it was probably dropped in the last 10 years, is what the in-game description says. And I think it's nice to note that archaeology isn't always about the oldest things we find. As a final point, another archaeological-ish research the player can do is on Ginger Island with Professor Snail. The player initially does free him from a cave where he has been trapped, and he's been doing a survey of the flora and fauna on the island for over a year. He occupies the field office on Ginger Island, and he then asks the player's help in finding fossilised and mummified animal remains for his research into ancient animals that inhabited Ginger Island. So that concludes our archaeological excavation into Stardew Valley. Are you also surprised by how much archaeology was in this game? Would you like to see this sort of video for any other games as well? Do let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe for more archaeology content, and I'll see you again. Goodbye.